Okay, so today we're going to work on understanding ordinary. Now, don't click away. Fail on this because I always understand ordinary. I believe that if you put this through the eyebrow test today, you're going to find some things that do stuff. What is the eyebrow test? Well, two eyebrows down, you're not buying it. Two eyebrows up. Oh, that's a surprise. One eyebrow up. Can I do that one eyebrow up? And it's like, maybe. Well, you're going to get one eyebrow up or two eyebrows up. It's something today, so I got to get right to it. I really, truly believe that while there are obvious advantages to large churches, there are more significant under the hood advantages to ordinary churches. Now, when I say ordinary church, I just mean small, but I don't use that word. It's what all kinds of people say. We are just a small church. No, we're just an ordinary church. Small, kind of the midline. Nobody knows. And we're going to get into that. But I'll just, for argument's sake, let's say it's 100 people or less. The ordinary church only has one staff member, if at all. Do you know how many paid staff members there are in churches? Do you know what percentage of people actually go through seminary training and get a theological degree, or at least partially so, and then end up with a full-time paycheck working in ministry? That's kind of what they enter as a dream, and it doesn't work for them. And we're going to describe ordinary for you today. Okay, so let me see here. All of this is going to be packed into, as best I can, into one book that was going to be a small book, but it just keeps getting thicker and thicker as I go along. The Ordinary Church Advantage. I doubt that anybody is going to pick this up if they aspire to being ordinary, but I think ordinary is outstanding, and I believe that history has demonstrated that ordinary is what has moved the kingdom of God forward. So let's get right into it. First of all, the comparisons that people make, well, in our church and your church, it's never been a fair comparison. Now, I've said in the past that the typical church is around 60 in attendance. There's some evidence in recent research that that's moved up towards 70. I'm not buying it. I mean, I just don't know, but I'm not buying it because of a number of different things. What we do know for sure is that while the numbers are soft, that is, we can't know exactly. There's a whole list of reasons for that, and I'll get into a few of them in a moment. But half of the churches are down there somewhere in the 60, 70 range in a typical Sunday. That's not the whole church. That's the attendance. There's a difference. You see, if I had 60 this week, but 10 people were here who weren't here last week, and 10 people who were here last week weren't there, that's 80 people, even though the attendance is 60. So we're going to get into some of the advantages the ordinary church has given that fact. The shape underneath that attendance figure is what we're going to look at. Now, part of what is the problem is the research is all over the map here. Some report attendance, some report members. I have this concept of home pool that I'm developing, and I looked it up and we said, no, somebody else. Well, wait a minute. The other study with a different denomination in a different country was measuring their attendance, as you might call the size of their church, by the people who showed up once a month. That gives you a much bigger number than the attendance on a Sunday. Although the people who show up once a month is a really good way to measure something that approaches what I call the home pool, but the home pool is bigger than that. And we'll get to the home pool later. Some surveys, they count the children, some they don't. Some they even count online participants. I think that's in la-la land. I guess I could live with that if it's somebody who is truly shut in and literally can't get out of their house and to the church building for whatever reasons, house or long-term care facility or whatever. But I would argue that even most people, they had someone to push the wheelchair, would really love getting out. Now, I know sometimes people can't get in the seat of the car, and there's all kinds of variables there. But paying attention to every person is what we're talking about. Now, any number that I quote to you ever, if I haven't done the exact research and defined the thing, the mushiness of what's out there and the way people count things, it's always about. It's not a firm number. But what is firm is this, that most churches are small. That's incontrovertible. I prefer the word ordinary because small has overtones to it that say less valuable, less effective, or weak, or something like that. I'm not buying that at all. Most people who go to church do not go to those ordinary churches. They go to big churches. So when you run into an individual, I ran into one a couple of weeks ago, and their church was about 2,000, and my wife said, "Oh, that's a really big church." The person said, "Oh, no, in our city, there's lots of churches bigger than that. Ours isn't big." Yeah, it is. It's way up there in the stratosphere if the attendance is 2,000. And no matter what the data set is, these numbers really hard to measure because everybody's standard is slightly different. But it's always true that there's more small churches than big churches. And it's always true that more people go to the big churches than go to the aggregate of the small churches. I don't know if you have to stop and think about that. Perhaps you do. Pause button. You can pause that. Well, not if you're live, you can't. But if you're watching afterwards, you can think about that. Most churches are small, but most people go to large churches. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's a fact. You can decide what's good or what's bad about it. But it isn't good just because it's in one category or the other. It could be good, big. It could be good, small. It could be bad and big. And it could be bad and small. But ordinary is the term I'd prefer. Okay, so I want to mention this evangelastic, that's not a typo, evangelastic propensity. I have it, you have it as well. We tend to remember the good times, and we tend to remember the times when the attendance was up. So it's very rare that when somebody reports on a survey what their attendance is, that it's actually a numerical thing figured out. They say, yeah, it's such and such. And it may have been such and such a year ago, and it may not be such and such this year, up or down. Okay, so there's this evangelastic. It kind of stretches. We always have the tendency to report more than what's reality. So, if there were 57 people there last week, we'd say 60, and we wouldn't say about 55, we'd say about 60. And we remember what was good. And we certainly don't like to talk about the bad years. Never mentioned at all. I was candidating at a church once that I became the pastor of, and I asked them what the attendance was like historically, and the answer of the key man, a really good man in the church, says, "Well, not far off our best." So I did the math. The attendance in that church was typically 205. Their best attendance, about a decade before, was something like 350. I forget the exact number, but it was calculated. And going from 350 to 200, I'd say is far off our best. No, in his mind, it was not far off our best, even though he recognized that it wasn't at their best. That's pretty typical. When somebody says, "Nice day," look out the window and check. If that may be their opinion, and they may just like snowy, cold days when they're on the inside. Who knows? So we do have this tendency, and when people self-report, they tend to overshoot what reality is. There was a study done by a major organization where they were looking for people who met 7 criteria for a church that was good at discipleship was their thing. And they went through, I think it was 1,500 churches that they surveyed and could only find 2 But all those 1,500 churches would not have said we're bad at discipleship, but this organization did say there was lots of room for improvement. We tend to overreport. So any number that you see reported is probably something that is closer to their best than it is to their typical. You see, you stand at your own door and you look in and say, oh, it's about so many people. You say it's about 60, but the actual head count comes out at 52. They do the same thing. If you stood at their door, you could count the number, but they just approximate generally. So the gap is probably, almost always is, that the reporting overstates the situation. So the ordinary church needs to not overstate its situation if it wants to deal with reality. And sometimes when a new leader moves in, his number one job is to define reality and to go and find what is statistically accurate and take care of it. If there isn't a historical average, he can appoint somebody to actually count noses for a month and then report that to its board. You know, if you don't want to count noses, count their legs and divide by 2, and you'll come pretty close. Now, what we know about ordinary churches is this, that the middle-sized church, the median, the one of which half are bigger and half are smaller, has a church budget self-declared in the range of $100,000. And that's about $1,400 per person per year, including the children. Okay, so a family of 5 would give 5 times $1,400 a year as typical. But the thing is, many people will give much more than that, and many people will give much less than that. So it's just a number in the middle. It's a real number, but it's a number we can work with. One of the interesting facts is the research would indicate that the bigger the church, the lower the number. Now, if we take the financial giving as one measurement, following through in stewardship, then we would very quickly ascertain that if that number is the only thing, and we measure discipleship as being what people give, not a full measure, but if we did, then the small churches, the ordinary churches, give more than the big churches. That's very important to understand, and that's statistically demonstrated. Now, is that a matter of discipleship? Well, you can have that discussion, but you can't say that small churches don't do as well financially on average, and typical ordinary churches do better than big churches. So 100 people seems to be about a barrier in broad strokes, okay? Everything isn't about here. If you have a typical in 100, and that typically is $100,000, and typically you have a full-time pastor that costs $60,000, which is less than the median household income in North America. It takes up 60% of the budget, and the best goes to the building, the heat, the curriculum, whatever. And 40% goes to just keep the things oiled, but 60% goes to the pastor. So above 100, then maybe the guy can say he's full-time. But below it, he might be working full-time. It's not talking about his hours, talking about his pay. Now, it's normal. It's ordinary. Since the churches are smaller than 100, it's ordinary for the pastor to not be getting a full-time paycheck. Now, did you know that? I don't think I knew that. When I came out of Bible college and I got called to a church, they paid me full-time, and they paid me not generously, but certainly adequately. We had the house that they owned that we lived in, and they gave the pay above that. And we had our first 2 kids when we lived there. We were able to afford everything that we needed to afford. And I think during that time, we even bought another car. There about 4 years. Again, I spoke evangelistically. I think it was 3 years and 9 months. I'm not sure. Okay. 100 becomes a barrier that makes a huge difference to you as the ordinary pastor. That's why most ordinary pastors who are watching this video are not watching it at 10 o'clock on Thursday morning when it goes live. They're doing something else. They've got to work a second job, or they're fitting it in at 2 o'clock in the morning when they're have insomnia. Wake up if that's you. I don't know. This is a big, big issue here. Co-vocational or bivocational is the norm. I prefer the term co-vocational, saying I got two jobs, and I want them to be of such a nature that I don't want to give up my non-church job. Even if they want me to, I'll move to a different church because I like having this sense of a double calling here. Bivocational is okay with me. It's a traditional word, but it seems to me that bivocational carries with it the emotional load of, he drives a school bus morning and afternoon, but he'd sure like to get out of it. I don't think it's a whole nother thing, but I believe that we should be teaching young people as they rise up that they're going to be bivocational, so they may as well learn to be co-vocational and figure out what the other income is going to be so they don't have to work the floor at the local grocery store packing boxes in the middle of the night while their family sleeps and while they get less sleep, and so that they go and pretend they're working full-time in the church. The church needs to be really realistic about this. Most of it in history, most of what has gone on has been pastors have not had full-time paychecks. That's something that needs to be stated right up the front when somebody says, I'm thinking of applying to go to seminary. And it's going to cost them at least $20,000 a year plus lost income for the time that they go to seminary because they have this sense that I'm called to ministry. Well, did you know you're also called to not get really properly paid for it? That's part of the calling. And you need to know that before you invest, maybe 3 years, $20,000 a year plus to whatever you pay that you didn't make. It's over $250,000 you got to invest to get that formal education. And that's why formal theological education, only 5% of the pastors, about 5 million pastors measured in the world, actually have any kind of formal training. They can't afford it, time-wise or financially. Now, one of the advantages you have in the ordinary church is that every number has a name. So if we say there were 80 people there, chances are really good that you or somebody near you or one of your key people can name everybody. Every one of those people has a name. I will guarantee you that there isn't a church of 1,000 anywhere on the planet. I say a church of 1,000, I mean 1,000 in attendance, where the senior pastor knows the names of everybody that was there on a given Sunday, because it's a shifting number. 900 who were here last week, 100 of them, there's again, 1,000 were here last week, but 900 of them are here this week, and 100 are not, but 100 new people who weren't there last week are in this week, so the number stays at 1,000. There's no human brain that can keep track of all of that, and software can. And by all means, if you're in a bigger church, you're at a tremendous disadvantage to do what you're supposed to do, take care of people. It's not a number. Every one has a name. Every one has certain potentials. Every one has certain problems. You can't love a number. When somebody just quotes me a number, I say, okay, that's information. Do you know the names of them all? Well, even in a ordinary church in the 50, 60, 70 or 8, there's nobody except possibly the pastor who knows the name of everybody in the room. I've tested this in churches. I've gone to a church, 50-ish or more, and I said, how many of you here believe you know everybody's name in the room? And 10 hands go up. Okay, so 50 hands don't go up. 10 hands go up. Then I say, now I want you to look around and look at every face and make sure that you know everybody, and the hands start to go like that. And there's nobody there who knows everybody. But everybody is knowable, and you can keep track of them. I've got many things that you can do to help keep track of them, and we'll get to them in due course. But I just want you to understand that. You can't love 50. You can love 50 times 1, but that 50 is not really 50 because there were 10 people who weren't here last week and are here this week and vice versa. So that's 50 is 70 or whatever it is. And again, these are about terms that I'm using, not specific numbers. And I don't want you to try and do the math. Well, you're welcome to do the math, but you need to be aware that your home pool is much bigger than your attendance figure. So if that's true, then we have to understand that social loafing is just not in the cards. It's just not possible. Social loafing is, well, it's somebody else's job. I have a saying that I picked up: if 2 people promise to feed your cat, when you're on vacation, your cat's going to die. Unless somebody schedules it and somebody says, you've got Tuesday, I've got Wednesday. Because they'll think that the other person is handling it. And it's not the pastor's job. I did a seminar at a church once when I said, what can you do to support your pastor? And the table of people, and one table of people came up with, we can tell the pastor when somebody's in the hospital. Oh, I came so close to letting them have it, but I was a good boy, and I didn't scold them. I just moved on and said, next. And I thought, oh, wow. What trouble there is that a group of maybe 8 people at a table would think that you're helping the pastor to tell him when somebody's in the hospital. Now, if you go and visit him in the hospital and tell the pastor, that's a different story. It's not just the pastor's job. One another is not a one-man job. It's the Bible over a dozen times says love one another. And it is your job in your church, whatever it is, to find people to love. Can you love them all? Not a chance. Can you love a few? Well, yeah, you'd better, because you're under marching orders from the King of Kings. And if the pastor demonstrates he, in fact, loves the people, one here, one there, and another there, sometimes selectively, and encourages others to get in touch with others, then the love can grow in the church. The house does the loving, not just the pastor. It is not just his job to encourage, to reveal, to do all the things that the Bible connects with the word love one another. Get our book, drop by sometime, and we'll go over it with you. Every job is one person deep in the ordinary church. Okay, I got one person who's the coordinator of this, and that person, for some reason, you'd get hit by a bus, and the job just is real risk. There's nobody to fill in. It can actually shut down a ministry. That kills morale. It's a big difficulty, but you also have the advantage of seeing who you can raise up as apprentices under that person while they did not get by the bus, so that when the time comes, they can take over. One of the great ways, I learned this from a book years ago, one of the great ways to pass the baton is to make sure that you have planned absences, legitimate absences, not just I'm going away, but legitimate absences. I have some other responsibility over there, and I need you to take over. And that apprentice will gulp and say, I don't know how, and say, it's okay, I'll walk you through it. It's a great way to raise people up, and they can find out that they actually can do it. When you're in an ordinary church, the categories are too small to sort out. And so you don't create silos. One of the great difficulties, in my view, of raising young people, children and young people up in the big church, it's a huge difficulty. You can't help but be a difficulty. It's just the way it is. It's one of the disadvantages of being large, is you've got 30 babies in the nursery, and then you've got 30 babies in the preschool department, then you got 30 babies in the grade school department, children, and then you got 30 people in the youth department. They never relate to others intergenerationally. But when you have 5 teenagers one of them is sitting beside a widow, can be of great encouragement to the widow and vice versa. And that widow can learn that teenager is interested in, and if that teenager is interested in going to somebody's K-pop conference, um, concert, and then the widow can pretend she's interested. It will actually show an interest and say, tell me about that music. I'm familiar with that. That's not the kind of music we had when I was young. But what do you like about it? It can carry on a conversation. That kid will light up like a Christmas tree if there's somebody who's 80 years old takes an interest in them. They will. They're not trying to resist you. Young people want that kind of input in their life. And there's some research that when you have somebody from a home church, when a kid goes off to college, and they're still in your home pool, even though they're not there, but the kid grows up and goes off to college, they get engaged and stay engaged in church if somebody in the church sends them a package of cookies. Just a little bit of love from home will keep them remembering and keep them longing for what they're missing from their old life while they develop this new frenetic pace in this new environment. There's research that's proven that. Love the kids for a way. When they come home at Thanksgiving or sometime, make sure that while they want to spend time with their old friends, make sure that the church recognizes them. When they go off to school, call them up to the front of the church and embarrass them and say, Mary's going off to such and such a school, and she's planning on becoming a psychologist, and some of you might need one. You can make a joke about the thing and say, will you pray for Mary that she'll be able to integrate all of the material that we have taught her from the Word down through the years in this church, and now going into this new world, which is going to challenge her thinking, that she'll be able to integrate the new things that she learns, set aside the things that are not consistent with the Word of God, and integrate her life so she can be the Christian woman she wants to be. Can we all stand together and pray for Mary? That will be, for that kid, no, they just disappeared. Out of the small church and the big church. Not right, folks. It's not right. You can give Mary attention in that small church, but in the big church, I got 15 Marys. You can't go through each of the testimonies. You can have them all come to the front, and you can say, generically, here's the holy water. I'll sprinkle it on you. God bless you. You can do what you can do in a way, but you still have to individualize it. You can't do it collectively. You just can't recognize everybody collectively as the church gets bigger. And there's lots of adults for the young people. In the ordinary church, you have such a tremendous advantages. The big church says, we need to hire somebody to run that. That's just somewhat inevitable. But in the ordinary church, you can get it done to what it costs you a nickel. Recognition is free in an ordinary church. Even if you're a pastor and you have everybody fill out a card, I recommend it. Do not put 16 data points on that card. Just all I want is a name and a phone number. That's all I want. And then I can follow up. And then maybe on the back side, say, write out your prayer request. You can take those 30 cards that come in, 20, 50 cards. You can sort them out on Monday morning saying, this needs work. That's okay. No, okay. And you can say, what about the so-and-sos? Let me write that down over here. I don't see their card. Were they missing on Sunday? I'll have to ask about that. You can say, take you 10 minutes to sort all that out. And you can recognize the people as one, with a name, with possibilities, with potentials, and with difficulties. And you can't follow up on all of them. But you can delegate all of them. Say, would you call these 2 people for me? And you can actually sit down in a room with your cell phone with maybe 2 people at the table and say, this is our 1 hour care meeting. And you can, every Tuesday evening at 8 o'clock, you get together and just have a prayer meeting with we 4 and no more. You can get those people gathered around the table and give them the name and the phone number, give them a little bit of a profile. Say, which, give these people a call. Now I'll tell you what for sure. I'm all going to answer their phone when you call. In fact, many people won't. But you will probably have the capacity to leave a message, and you will have the capacity to send them a text. Recognition is easy, relatively speaking. Just imagine how complex that is in a large church. You don't even know who's sitting on the other side of the church, and they're the best friend in a large church. A big church buys software to manage it, and software is useful, and I recommend that you use the best software you can possibly get. But software doesn't give a personal involvement and a personal answer. What should the Bible say about it? Did it talk about database and email lists and attendance charts? No, it was always about the people. Now, this is what you got to deal with here. There's 7 numbers in a system here. You see those, the red and the blue on the bottom of the screen there. On the outside of the church, there's your awareness of who's out there. And you can't count all of that. That's just way too complicated. Well, you can get the demographic numbers from a study, and that'll help you about as much as National Smile Week. You can know how many people are there, but it's really how many people will you approach? You have to have the awareness, but you got to approach them. Figure out how to approach them. The more personal, the better. Eventually, those 2 things, the people who are not in your church, some of them, if you do it properly, will be in the acquisition phase where they come to your church. And they come once, and if you don't say hello, they won't come twice. In fact, that's what happens constantly with people. And newcomers don't feel welcome. They get the Walmart greeter, and that's fine. But they don't have anybody sitting beside them. I've been there on vacation. When I go to a church, hardly ever does anybody turn around and say, I don't know you. I shouldn't say, are you on vacation here? And say, well, it's so nice to see you today. What brought you here today? Oh, you're an old-time member. Isn't that wonderful? When did you start? Oh, no. They don't carry on a conversation. They don't say, where are you from? They don't take any interest at all. And if you're going to assimilate people who are testing you, then you've got to demonstrate that you're interested in them becoming the next thing, the adherence. The people who are adhering to the church, they got glue, they stick. And you pay attention to them. And when they start to slip, you got to be attentive to that, or you can lose them. So there's 7 things that you got to deal with in the ordinary church advantage series, which is going to be, if I can ever get them all done, maybe a dozen books. We're going to deal with each of these things and the ways in which they overlap, and it's not going to cost you. Well, it'll cost you, the price of the book, but it'll cost you sweat equity. And it's entirely possible. You don't say, oh, well, if we had better this. No, this is all about personal. Now, there are 3 actions that move you from one category to the other. First of all, you have to have the awareness. Then you've got to have the assimilation tactics and approaches that you have to monitor, because they will just go to seed on you overall. Now, very quickly, you've got to work on them while they're there and pay attention to them. And it's always about the activities that you do. It's not about the numbers. It's all about, bottom line, your church is going to die if acquisition doesn't overreach attrition. You're in trouble. If the attrition is, if people are dying off faster than they're being born, then you got a problem. Well, you can't solve that. But if people are moving out faster than they're moving in, then you're just going to have to get out there and spend more awareness on the newcomers coming to town, and you get more of them. You don't take care of that. Numbers in, numbers out. It's really not complex, but it'll sneak up on everybody else. They won't know that the typical attendance last year was 52, and this year it's 49. They won't know the difference. But over time, you do the math on that kind of loss, you'll be down to nothing. You'll be down to less of the part-time paycheck than you always had. There's 4 ways out. People move away, they die. They deny the faith. It's more than just backsliding. They slip away. They may not even know 4 ways out. And there is a coming and going. Two things you got to do before they ever show up at your church meeting in any kind, the awareness and approach. There's three during the acquisition, assimilation, and the authenticity, adherence. You got to work on those things while they're there and help them. You know, when we think of discipleship, usually it's only talking about adherence. There's 600 things you got to pay attention to. So discipleship, schmeichelship, yes. But what about all of the other things as well? And then after, as they're on their way out, you got to pay attention to them when they're starting to fade. Scolding them isn't going to help. And eventually, some people are going to die and you're going to have a funeral, yeah. The road is already open to you, much more so than it is to a large church. Acquisition always is a personal event. I'll deal on that some other time. You know, of all the books that are out there, nobody wrote one for this church, and there's reasons for that. The ordinary church is not a big market because they don't have a lot of money in their budget. And so and often like software sells at tiers, levels. The ordinary church just is not something you can write for that you can make money on. The market follows where the people are, and the people are in the big church. So if you've got a church of 2,000, it's guaranteed that if the pastor writes a book, there's going to be at least 200 of them bought by the people in the church, and that's a good start. And apparently these students that come to seminary come from the big churches. Wow, that means that there's so much of this kind of data that's important for them. It's so much that needs to happen. You can make things happen easily in your own church. It's just ordinary. 1/2 of the pastors in churches, whether they're the lead pastor, senior pastor, prime leader, or others, 1/2 of the people who have been educated for ministry do not get a full-time paycheck from the ministry. You know that? See, I told you they'd get your eyebrows up. You're very normal. If in fact you're underpaid, maybe working full-time, a job and being underpaid, you gotta explain this to the church because they don't know that $30,000 a year doesn't carry it today. In the community where I live, the median family income is well over $100,000 a year. And if you say to that ordinary church, well, you got to pay your pastor about the same as you'd pay a vice principal in a school, they can't afford it. You're going to have a second income, and you'd better find a way to make that income as profitable as you can, both on a relational standpoint and a joy standpoint. You got to do the work you love to do, not just because you got to do it, and it's got to pay you well. But you can keep track of all the people. You don't need anything special. You just have to be disciplined to do it. You can write down 2 lists, the people who were there and the people who weren't there. You can probably do that from 3. You can certainly do it from a checklist if you got to print it out. And if you can't, then you can check with your spouse or the person you're mentoring and saying, who was here this last week? Well, I don't know. What? And get them to know. Hey, that family was sitting on the 3rd row on the left-hand side. Do you know their name? Well, let me tell you about that family. And so on. You can actually make a real difference if you know who the people are as a primary leader, and if you delegate to others and teach them how to work in the ministry that they need to work in. There is so much more that needs to happen in the life of a church. It's very ordinary. Pastors in evangelical churches are not full-time. Even those that are count themselves as full-time. Not many of them get paid too much. Yeah, you heard about the pastor. There's the mega church pastor, and he got paid $600,000 a year. Yeah, seen those stories too, and they're not lying. And then they don't account for their book sales and other things. There's lots of problems out there, and people will be sure to point them out to you. But if you're just ordinary, and people can actually see what you're like, and authenticity reigns in all this stuff. And if you are really, truly authentic, and you'll admit, broadcast it, but you'll admit some of your weaknesses, people can see that. When people get to know you and get closer to you, it's not like you're way across there on the platform, and out of mind, out of sight, but they can get to relate to you. And it's so important that you build a church that does that. Ordinary's okay. It really is. It especially is okay. It's what God has called you to, and God has placed you there. And maybe if you do a really good job in ordinary, maybe there'll be one of those very few things. It's not like a ladder that you can climb, like a pyramid where it gets smaller and smaller. There's jobs in those big churches. They're few and far between, and my friends who are in the big churches will say this is a lot harder than I thought because they get more criticism and people believe they can and so on. Come on, folks. Get the ordinary church. It's working as it should. It have an advantage is to just hand it to you on a silver platter. Make sure that you live by them, and you'll be amazed at what God can do in your church.